after this is all said and done, please keep 6 feet away from me. That one still rings true.
I like the one where, if you're old like me, you remember the movie Gremlins, where he said, and next month featuring, and they're holding a thing of Gizmo over a sink of water, getting ready to make the Gremlins happen. I don't know if you guys have seen that one yet.
Christy or Melissa, are we all set? Should we get
We'll just maybe give it just 1 or 2 more minutes, just to make sure everybody gets switched over.
Okay.
And yes, we will kick it off. And I am recording this session, so just keep that in mind. I did turn on the recording for this room as well.
That's so cool.
I am not sure if, John, are you on the call? Did you manage to get on today with us? Okay, so we're waiting for John. He has reached out to me today.
Okay.
So he's supposed to be able to log in. Hopefully he's able to do that.
More coffee.
More than 4 cups of coffee?
I'm on 5, 6, 7, and 8 right now.
Gosh,
David.
I don't know. I'd be jumping out of my skin.
I'm impotent.
Melissa, there are a couple of call-in folks, so it's possible John is in there.
Yeah, I called out hoping maybe he would hear me and respond, but.
Paging John.
There are several people who just have the number 1.
I know, I saw that.
And I figure we can kind of just move forward. If he joins in, that's great. And if not, we can
definitely.
move forward with the rest of our panel.
Definitely.
I think, Karishma, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Sure. Sounds good. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our panel this morning, Top Military and Veteran Needs in the National Capital Region during COVID-19. My name is Karishma Sheth, and I'm the Chief Program Officer at EveryMind, and I'm excited to be here with you all this morning. And I am joined by our panelists. I'll give a quick intro, but I just wanted to highlight, so as you all saw through that incredible data presentation, that over the last 2 years, our top 3 needs, I should say, have really been employment, income support, and then housing and shelter. And then as we all pivoted, with COVID-19 in March until now, we've really seen those needs remain at the top, especially with housing and employment. Then, as you also heard Erica mention through some of her client stories, that we've seen a tremendous increase for food and a significant increase of food insecurity with the onset of this pandemic. And so we have a great panel joining us this morning to focus on these 3 needs, which is employment, food insecurity, and then housing. So I'd like to introduce our fellow panelists this morning. Let's start with our employment expert, David Muir, who's the Senior Vice President of the Veteran Staffing Network at Easter Seals. And David is the SVP of a social enterprise project at Easter Seals, which is the Veteran Staffing Network. And the VSN is dedicated to providing top-tier military talent to employers while assisting veterans, guardsmen, reservists, and military spouses to help them secure long-term meaningful jobs. Since being hired to build the VSN, Easter Seals has been responsible for putting more than 2,500 men and women to work in 35 different states, which is incredible. And this unique program has also enabled Easter Seals to provide career coaching services to nearly 11,000 veterans and family members over the last 6 years. And prior to joining Easter Seals, David developed a job search curriculum utilized by the Commonwealth of Virginia. And in 2011, he was a solution architect and lead instructional designer for the first redesign of the TAP employment workshop in more than 20 years. So welcome, David. And then I'd also like to introduce Patrick Campbell, who will be our food expert on the panel. And Patrick is the Senior Emergency Manager for Montgomery County, Maryland, which is one of the most diverse counties in the United States. Patrick has operational leadership for the following county plans, which is a bunch. So mass care, recovery, family reunification, emergency support for undocumented peoples, and he's also the National Capital Region's chairperson for mass care. In addition, he works with hundreds of organizations throughout the county to provide emergency and disaster assistance that is culturally appropriate and trauma-informed, which we know is a significant need in our community. Prior to this position, he was the state disaster lead for Red Cross Virginia. During this time, he deployed for multiple national disasters, providing critical shelter, housing, feeding, and recovery support to communities devastated by hurricanes. And earlier in his career, Patrick served in the United States Coast Guard, deploying for disasters and providing search and rescue support. Currently, he is very active with the COVID-19 response in Maryland. Along with his regular duties, he's supporting the public health response and expanding programs to protect our homeless communities, vulnerable populations, managing quarantine hotels, and working on expanding the medical capabilities of the county and the mass fatality unit. His most significant effort has been his leadership role in the Food Security Task Force with the mission of reemploying food workers and feeding the many unemployed. He is currently assigned the following operational roles for COVID-19 response, which is operational chief for the Food Security Task Force and logistics for chief community testing. So welcome, Patrick. And then hopefully we will also have John Pomory joining us. He's the Director of Supportive Services for Veterans Families Program at with Alliance and Sheppard Pratt. So welcome to David, Patrick, and John. And I'd like to start off our panel discussion by having each of you just answer this initial question, which is, how did your respective organizations pivot in response to COVID-19? And how, with that pivot, were you able to serve your population? So David, maybe if you want to start.
Sure, happy to. And thank you, Karishma, and thank you, everybody at our partners and serving together every mind. We've really enjoyed our time together, really since your inception. COVID impacted us significantly, like many others. Probably a dual blow. So from an employment standpoint, our primary mission is to engage employers and get them to work with us as a staffing provider. Hiring has slowed to a crawl across the country, and the job market's really changed a bit. What we've seen is obviously the hospitality, tourism, travel industry was completely decimated and continues to see some significant negative impact. Professional services was a little bit more fortunate in that regard, although the companies in the professional services arena certainly took a pause on hiring to kind of see how COVID would shake out and to adjust to its now primarily remote workforce. And then organizations that had an incredible spike in hiring were tied really to supply chain, grocers, delivery folks, think Amazon, Instacart, things of that nature. So it's been a very interesting shift in the world of employment. And then on the supportive side, career coaching really took a pause as well. We did a significant amount of career coaching in person, which clearly was going to be put on pause. Our referrals slowed down because I think everybody was kind of hunkering down to see what the fallout would be. So how we pivoted, well, from a development standpoint and finding employers, we have dug deeper into supply chain with some success that's beginning to really spur. And our partners in the professional services arena are now beginning to feel a little bit more comfortable about bringing people into the fold and making new hires. When it comes to career coaching, we, like most of the rest of the country, began to leverage Zoom, which launched a new series for us called Tuesday Talks. If you haven't been a part of them, you may want to take a look. Yolanda Rayford, who's a really amazing career coach, had joined our team just at the beginning of the pandemic, came up with the idea, and she's been working not only through our network, but through our partner networks like USO Metro and a number of others to host a variety of online training webinars to teach people about things like building a master resume and how to network and how to interview in this world. So it's been an interesting shift, but innovation is part of the culture of Easter Seals, and we're really excited that we've been fortunate enough to adapt to today's nature.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit about how you all have pivoted and how you've been able to support the client population as well?
Sure. I mean, for us, obviously, being the Department of Health and Human Services, we are the lead agency in response. So everything for us changed. Having under the Department of Health and Human Services, we have both the human services side and public health. And so for us, it was simply saying is how do you do all this additional work with the increased traditional labor? And what I mean by that is, we saw obviously unemployment benefits skyrocketed. In food security, we saw 500 to 600% increase within weeks. Obviously now we're dealing with the fact that many folks who have not been able to pay either their rent or their mortgage, those foreclosures and evictions are starting to begin again. And so sometimes for the Department of Health and Human Services, it's been the incident that never ends. We usually see an arc with a disaster where, we prepare for it, then it has its rise and its fall. This is not, this just continues to go on in terms of its impacts. Obviously it began as simply not simply, but a public health emergency, and it has expanded into a human services disaster. Food security and unemployment have affected, a huge portion of the population. When we first started getting involved with this, it was first like, okay, what can we do? Obviously testing wasn't available in the early stages. It was simply, getting medical supplies, setting up hospitals and making sure our capabilities were ready just in case, because we didn't know what to expect. When we think about veteran population, obviously it's not necessarily an event that, automatically hits every vet, but if there's already higher levels of unemployment, it's going to affect that. And then of course, one of the earlier things we began doing was just trying to figure out how do we support homebound veteran populations with food and things like that was some of our concerns. Obviously you have a lot of vets who come back with injuries, and then that puts them at higher risk for COVID-19. So certainly putting together programs that can protect vulnerable populations was really important. But yeah, no, I would say for us, how did it affect us? It completely upturned our world. And to this day, it does not change. We're still working at a high operational tempo. And, the only difference is in the early days, we were primarily focused more on public health. Today, probably the bigger portion of what has impacted us now is the human services impacts.
Wonderful. And Melissa, do we know if John was able to join?
I've heard he's been sent over. John, were you able to join us? He's having a little trouble getting in to the meeting. So I'm trying to work with getting him in, but I thought he had already been sent over, but I'll keep working on it.
Okay.
Hopefully we get him in on time.
Okay, awesome. Well, I can share a little bit too in terms of how EveryMind, you all have heard of the pivot that we've made with serving together and responding to our growing food insecurity needs with the program and serving our military veteran community. I know also with EveryMind at large, we've seen a 25% increase in calls to our 24/7 hotline. Our calls and texts have gone up, so an increased demand in terms of mental health supports as people are feeling increased levels of social isolation, prolonged stress and anxiety. Those are a lot of the things that we've been hearing. Similar to what you said, David, we've pivoted to adding technology through Zoom to be able to provide mental health services, which has been significant and huge. And where that's been great is that it's really helped to remove some of the barriers to accessing, mental health services, like where transportation and getting to and from an appointment is one of the biggest barriers. So, and I know with our military veteran population, we've also heard of an increase in mental health needs due to some re-traumatization for our veterans. And so I wanted to share some of the things that we've been seeing at EveryMind from a mental health perspective as well. So while we wait for John to get on, why don't we get into, we've got some in-depth questions for all three of our panelists based on their respective areas of expertise and focus. And then if we have time, we'll open up some questions, from our participants. So first, David, the veteran staffing.
Actually, real quick, sorry to interrupt. This is John. I still can't get it. I'm having computer glitches, so I wasn't able to get on the Zoom part. but I am on the call-in part if you can hear me. But this is John Pomory from Sheppard, Pratt.
Great. Well, welcome, John. We're so glad you can join us. Absolutely. Before David, we move the question for you, John, if you can share with us what Alliance and Sheppard Pratt, how did you all pivot to respond to COVID-19, and how did that help to serve your client population? And welcome.
Well, one of the things that the VA allowed us to do is broaden what we could do in terms of like hotel stays. Historically, we were allowed to, we could only put someone in a hotel, a veteran in a hotel, if there was a concrete housing plan. Like for instance, today is Tuesday. If I was the veteran and I was going to be going to an apartment on Thursday, and there was a lease and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't have any place to stay tonight or tomorrow, then we could put us, SSVF could put us in a hotel room. But without that concrete housing plan, we couldn't. Once COVID-19 started, at first they allowed us to put people in hotel rooms to get them off the street that were 60 and older or had underlying medical conditions. But then quickly, as things became worse, they broadened that, based on discussions with different directors from SSVF and everything, and they broadened that to where we can get someone off the street right away, get them into. We have to confirm eligibility, but once we confirm eligibility for the program, then we can get them off the street, and then start working on trying to get them into permanent housing, because that's still ultimately the goal. But that's helped a lot because we've been able to get 90 people. 90 plus now, but 90 people off the streets, so that they are at less risk of being exposed to COVID-19 and or transmitting COVID-19 if they would have it and be asymptomatic. So that's been a big way that we pivoted. It's been able to help the veteran community and hopefully the larger community quite a bit.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, really incredible work across the panel with all of these organizations pivoting during, such a challenging time, to say the least. So thank you all. So then moving along from there, so David, wanted to start with asking you, know that the Veteran Staffing Network at Easter Seals is one of our top providers in our Serving Together network for both us sending out referrals and then also referrals coming in from you all. And then as we saw in the data presentation earlier, employment has historically been a top need for our veterans and military families in the region. So can you speak to this a little bit more, please?
Sure. Well, the fortunate thing, if you want to look at it that way, is living near the capital, we're the last ones that are going to be impacted by a contracting labor market, and then the first ones to benefit once things open back up. Additionally, the majority of work here in the DC market overall is focused more on professional services than it is, say, hospitality, tourism, for example. Not that those industries haven't been impacted. But I think overall, what our folks still need to do is get access to skills retraining. Those people who are finding themselves unemployed, maybe coming from markets that they've never thought they would be in the restaurant business forever. They need to begin looking at opportunities to work with partnerships through a community college or through an IMVF to be able to go and get certifications and IVMF. When I say IMVF, my apologies. But to be able to go and get the education and that skills retrained to be able to hit the workforce in the needs that the community has. And right now that need is still focused around information technology, anything in the medical space, particularly medical billing and coding, which is not a very long training, but it is grossly needed. There's a huge vacuum of talent there. Cybersecurity is huge. Program and project management with a focus on IT. This town is very much focused on information technology. So if people can look into those areas or anything in the medical field, those two industries themselves are exploding.
Great, thank you. Thank you. John or Patrick, anything you wanted to add in terms of that, or I can move on to Patrick. I've got a question for you. So since the shut down due to COVID, food, as we discussed, clearly became a top need for our military connected community and across, the region in general and across the country. So can you please share some of the unique challenges that you're seeing? And I know that you're studying the relationship between food insecurity and mental health. So can you speak to that a little bit as well?
Sure. So when, March hit, initially, obviously, nobody was, the big question right away wasn't, food security, until all of a sudden, they started shutting down everything. And now all of a sudden we had people who had to make a decision of what they were going to pay for, whether it was one or both people who lost income or people who had it reduced. So when we first started thinking about food security, then we, very quickly in early April, we already started seeing a 300% and 400% increase that our food providers. And when I say food providers, that's like saying the word food bank, but food bank means a very specific food provider. All groups that hand out food are considered food providers. We had to decide, where did we need to first put our energy? And so when we were hitting early April, our food providers, their growth went up to 300% to 400%. And then the entire food market shifted. All of a sudden, people who were getting a lot of their food from restaurants were now having to go to a grocery store. So that then created a secondary problem for us. And that is like, all of a sudden peanut butter and pasta and rice weren't available simply because the entire market shifted from where they got a lot of their food from restaurants to now entirely depending on consumer sized packaging from grocery stores. So now we had two shortages. One, there was increased demand, but then the foods we needed for food banks and food providers was not available. They couldn't get a lot of the cheaper items. Capital area food bank amongst all the food banks in the United States also had a drop in donations. A lot of donations comes from restaurants and warehouses. And also when that industry dropped off, they weren't donating because they didn't have the capacity. Food rescue is a huge part of the food provider world, but when restaurants are closed, they're not donating their leftover food and steaks and onions and potatoes. So we saw an instant growth. And what you start seeing, initially when we do it, we'd form an event, and if the event was going to start at 10, people started showing up at 9. But as the event started going on and over the months, we'd start an event at 10, people started showing up at 7. As the lines got longer, they started showing up earlier. The reason why I believe the mental wellness part of it is so very important and why we can't forget about this is because they're coming to line 3 hours early, not because they want to. They're coming in because they have food insecurity. And when we have insecurity and we don't believe we can meet our basic human needs, we're going to do whatever it takes. So we have seen things that we call like, some people will call it like food hoarding. They might get 4 or 5 boxes in a week if they can, because next week they might not get any. Whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter. If you're fearful of not being able to feed your family, you will do whatever it takes. And so our goal, came to is how do we expand our food program? So we did a couple tiers. One was we started purchasing as a county large amounts of food staples from wholesalers. It put wholesalers back in business. But it also increased the amount of food that they were able to put out. We partnered with USDA in a number of programs where we're pushing out about 500,000 pounds. Yeah, 500,000 pounds. Want to make sure I didn't say that too high, but it is 500,000 pounds of vegetables and fruit a week. And then we also had to say, okay, how do we protect specific groups of peoples? So obviously you have disabled populations and you have veteran populations that may have disabilities. You have senior populations that are high risk. We know COVID affects those with diabetes, heart disease higher. So we did institute specific programs that supported them. So for example, we expanded the county's senior nutrition program by quite a bit. So where we're actually delivering more meals to people who cannot prepare food themselves, nor go out and get it. We also expanded how we brought food out. We expanded the ability of our food providers to deliver food to high-risk people. So some people could prepare food. It was just too risky for them to go outside. So we get them unprepared food that they can cook at home. But a big part of food security, I really think it's really important to realize is that when we get people food security right, it takes a lot of pressure off them. They know they're going to feed their kids. They're going to be able to feed themselves. It allows them then also to focus on maybe what else is going on in their life. Maybe they were already dealing with mental illness that was strong before this. If I can't give them food security, I'm going to make that worse. And so I can't, there isn't a detachment between food and not food, right? They are together. And, my feeling was we worked really hard and really aggressive to expand our food programs. We have a huge food network now that's expanded. We've added dozens of additional food partners, including Every Mind, who also now delivers food. We have dozens of food partners, groups that never did food before, CASA, churches that weren't originally food providers, but they work with a certain ethnic community. And so what we realized was for us to meet food security and meet the demand of the community was we had to add culturally appropriate partners that worked in those communities, but also expand to non-traditional partners like Every Mind, like CASA, who are normally human services, to reach out to everybody. Because the other thing about it is especially if we're dealing with mental illness or folks who have high disabilities, they're not going to be the group that wants to say, oh my God, I need help. They are often kind of protective of that side of themselves. So when we work with partners that they're familiar with, it means they have a connection that will allow them to get in there. So food security to me, I mean, we're not talking about it as much because, we started with a pandemic, then we talked about, food insecurity, but we have the ability to, I'm not going to say correct any issues here, but we have the ability to make people feel secure so they can take care of themselves, that they can meet their basic human needs. When we think of Maslow's, theories, if they're not eating and they don't have a roof over their head, they're not going to be able to do the deeper work that it takes to heal.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is so critical. And we see that in our work every day at Every Mind, even before the pandemic, that if you are worried about where your next meal is coming from, where you're going to be sleeping that night, and you are not emotionally, mentally ready and available to receive therapeutic services, right? Because you're trying to get your basic needs taken care of. And I mean, and then the mental stress that you spoke to, for so many, sorry, there's a little feedback, so it threw me off. In terms of being a provider and then not being able to provide for your family and for your loved ones, some of their basic needs, the impact that has and makes you feel as a provider, and a caretaker, that I can't even support my family with their basic needs of food, it has a huge mental and emotional toll on people. So thank you for sharing that, Patrick. It's really some incredible work that's happening across the county. And so glad to hear that. So John, I wanted to focus on a housing specific question for you. So housing continues to be a top 3 need in our region. It has been for many, many years now. And with so many eviction moratoriums being lifted, what do you see, coming down the pipeline, and how is Sheppard Pratt preparing? I mean, it's hard to prepare for the wave of housing that's anticipated, but if you could speak a little bit as to how you all are preparing and how you're responding to some of these moratoriums being lifted.
Well, one of the ways we're preparing, first of all, by the way, so there's no confusion. When you hear us referred to as Alliance or Sheppard Pratt, Alliance has been under the Sheppard Pratt umbrella per se for many years now, like 8-10 years now. But we are officially, like as far as branding, will be listed as Sheppard Pratt. So anyone out there in the community that's worked with us before as Alliance, if you see Sheppard Pratt's SSVF, that's the same thing. There's no difference in the staff or the contact numbers or the services. But anyway, so I just want to make that clear because I know that can be confusing because that's right in the middle of changing right now. But as far as, and to answer your question, we do expect, as everyone does, that there's going to be a huge eviction wave at some point. And we're just not positive exactly when it's going to come, and that it's been somewhat staggered because there'll be, because of the moratoriums, and it'll be lifted somewhat, potentially somewhere and not somewhere else and stuff like that. So what we've been trying to do is preemptively get a hold of as many veterans as we can that are behind on rent and aren't working. And when that moratorium is lifted, they are going to be identified very quickly as being someone that's far behind. And so we've tried to preemptively start paying back their arrears and working out, different. I'm sorry.
Is there, Christy or Melissa, can you check on that breakout room ending? I think we still have.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't know if everyone was hearing that or that was just me. But so we're preemptively we've been over the last few months trying to anticipation of that wave to come, paying down back rent as much as we can with people. Now I know there's some veterans that unfortunately, I'm saying this as a veteran, it's not a shot at veterans, but they're busy with other things and haven't gotten in contact with us yet. That will once the wave starts. And so at some point it is going to be a big wave, but we're trying to cut down on it as much as possible by starting to pay back rent, back in June, July, and, through August and everything. Because obviously that's coming, and not only are people behind. Okay, so I just got the message saying that I'm now in a breakout session. Does that mean I was cut off before?
Yes. So
John Pomory, do you have any problem with us putting your contact information in the chat?
No problem at all.
Okay, we'll do.
So John Pomory, but still it's confusing because it's Alliance, but our emails still say Mosaic, which is also under Sheppard Pratt, but we are Sheppard Pratt. So for right now, my email address is still john.pomory@mosaicinc.org. So I have no problem with that going out at all. We'd be happy to work with any agencies we can to help veterans, and we'd also be happy to be contacted by any veterans directly that we can help. Keep in mind, for anyone that's not as familiar with our program, for SSVF, there are eligibility criteria, and the eligibility criteria is that someone is either homeless already or facing homelessness, like they're facing eviction, or even with the moratoriums, they're behind enough that they would face evictions once it ends. 2, they have something other than a dishonorable discharge or a bad conduct discharge because of a general court martial. So anything other than those things we can help with. And then the final thing is we have the AMI guidelines, area median income. They have to be 50% or lower to be eligible for our program. And we're supposed to actually target 30% lower, but we can help up to 50% lower. But if it's 50.1%, I'm not trying to sound sarcastic, and we don't have any discretion with that at all.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And thank you for all the incredible work that you're doing. I know there's a lot of concerns. I mean, you heard, everyone heard Ann say, like, one of the programs that we offer at Every Mind too is homeless outreach services. And, the concern with moratoriums being lifted, how that's going to impact our clients and communities with housing. So there's a lot of concern of what's to come down the pike. So I know we have about 15 minutes. So I'd like to open up to our panel with one kind of final question, and then we'll open up with any questions from our participants. So what message do you want our audience, our participants, to take away from this panel today? And David, maybe if you want to go first.
Sure. So, first off, job search really begins and ends with knowing what you want, right? So if you've got someone who is not sure, like directing them to the VSN, talking to us just about that exploratory conversation. I think the young lady who was speaking from IVMF earlier today had mentioned that, the biggest challenge that they see is people not knowing what they want to be when they grow up. Once you have line of sight on that, then you can begin to take action. From an employment perspective, the administration currently has put a huge push on apprenticeships, and I think regardless of the results of the election in the fall, in November, you're still going to see that continued push because people going through apprenticeship programs are absolutely achieving results. There are long-term career path opportunities there. Franchising is another way for individuals who are interested in finding a career path that has some not only long-lasting potential, but takes advantage of the skill sets earned in the military. Another great pathway to flow through. And if they have questions about that, they can certainly reach out to us, and we're more than happy to direct them.
Great, thank you. Patrick, your takeaway or for our audience, or a call to action?
It's interesting is when I first took over the role of food security, it wasn't my first, wouldn't have been my first pick. It was like they asked me, pulled me into it because I wasn't paying attention to it. And the more I've dived deep into it, you realize that even before this incident began, we actually had a lot of people that were food insecure who weren't aware that services like this begun. And that's true with many services, whether it's mental health or job assistance. And so, I think the struggle is always going to be for us to figure out how do we expand our outreach. And in that sense, I say, if anybody is interested in trying to figure out how you serve more veterans who are food insecure, I can get you connected into the food network because I'm now on the food council for the county. But, a lot of counties also made it that it was a challenge for people to find out where food resources were. And we've learned and we've adapted. We've created actually a call center now. If you call 311 in Montgomery County, they'll refer you to a food network that will help connect people to food services that are appropriate for them. But we know outreach has never been strong enough because there's never enough money put in it. So we have to make sure we're expanding our outreach. We have to make sure that we're connecting with the audiences that need us. I look at it simply. My work is real simple in the sense that my job is to shape your narrative. And what I always say is by shape your narrative is if you're struggling with food and the story is I was struggling with food and nobody came to help me versus I was struggling with food I was able to easily find the resources I need, and there was a bunch of groups that directed me in the right direction. That changes their outcome, how they got about. And, that's what I hope we're going to do. And I hope that as we continuously send out flyers, we continuously try to find unique ways to outreach. And that's why even reaching out to this group, letting people know there are resources there. They can call 311, you can call 311 is huge, because getting them connected sooner than later changes that narrative. It wasn't I struggled for weeks and no one came. Instead, it was I struggled, I told somebody, they got me connected to what I needed, they gave me the help I needed. And that also means food networks need to be aware that there are mental health services out there. So when they have the opposite encounter, somebody needs that, they refer to the appropriate place as well.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you. And John?
One of the things that we're part of the Housing First model, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs was referred to earlier. Obviously, if people don't have the needs like food and shelter met and everything, then they're less likely to be able to reach out and take care of other things. I really want to emphasize during this time period that, especially for a lot of the veterans that we're dealing with, that we're trying to help that have post-traumatic stress disorder issues, that's living kind of like in a crisis type mode, and there's a lot of things that you learn, like when you're in violent situations and, certainly combat situations, but violent situations, there's a lot of modes of operating emotionally and, and practically and everything that are very geared towards the right now and the survival. And they make sense and they're smart and to be able to adapt to those environments, but they don't necessarily translate into like the getting back into the world and having like a living life strategy, like for thriving. There's a difference between thriving and surviving. And I just want to remind everyone to be mindful right now that while a lot of veterans were already struggling with those kind of issues, now on top of that, there's almost kind of an exponent because the country is kind of in a crisis mode. Not kind of, I mean, we are, in a lot of ways. And so those two can play into each other to where someone that's already struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, now they've got the crisis on top of it with COVID-19, I think that can feel particularly alienating for them because they can feel even more so alone and go very much back even deeper into that crisis mode where they're not thinking in terms of plans and reaching out and what's going to happen next week and next month and 3 months, because things are transient. You're just surviving. You can't count on we could be in the space camp today, and the space camp might be gone a month from now. Theoretically, I mean, there's just a lot of different things. So the more we can do with outreach, like was mentioned before, the more we can do with quickly linking, getting in touch with people and then getting them linked up with services, or at least letting them know of services and trying to help encourage them with constructing plans and everything to keep them out of that survival transient type mode. I mean, like even before COVID-19, we used to have case managers that would say, like, I don't understand why someone won't go to, DSS, for instance. Well, in the sense like they were just being defiant. And I used to say, like, obviously we do have some defiant clients, but generally, if you're up all night with nightmares, if you're checking the windows over and over and over to see if an enemy's coming, if you're thinking about, your friends over and over and over that aren't here anymore and all this kind of stuff, and the things that happen to stop them from being here and all those kind of things, a lot of the day-to-day practical stuff doesn't register the same. It doesn't seem like it would to someone that's not dealing with those things. It's not an excuse. I'm saying it's something that you have different things weighing on you. So it's always been incumbent upon us to try to get in there and help, not just us, I'm saying all of us in this field, to get in there and try to help and try to bring them back to the world to where they can go towards less survival strategies and more thriving type strategies. And I just want to emphasize that during this time period with COVID-19, I think that's coming up a lot for a lot of people, because it does feel like things are so uncertain that what can you count on? So the more we can reach people, the more people we can reach, the more quickly we can reach them, and the more we know about each other's services and the way we can connect them to, hey, if you're food insecure, we can get you right to this place, get you in contact with this place. If you're housing insecure, we can get you right in contact with this place. It's always been important that we work together, but during this time period, I think it's crucial that we all work together and try to help everybody. But in this case, I'm talking about the veteran community, not have that sense that they're alone and everything's transient and you can't really count on anything being there tomorrow if it's there today. So the more we can show them stability and the opportunity for stability, I think it's that much more important right now during this crisis.
Well said.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And the only thing I would add to that is that Everymind is a mental health provider. I mean, we all have spoken to how, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, housing, employment, being able to support your family is critical, but then the impact that this pandemic and everything else going on in the country and in the world is having on our mental health, that, to remember to also then connect with clients in our communities about mental health. So your basic needs have been met, but now, you've been through a lot. It's been traumatic, it's been stressful, you've been isolated, you've been anxious, and maybe some mental health supports can also be beneficial and helpful. And so helping to have those conversations, helping to change the conversation a little bit around mental health and wellness, so that helps to reduce some of the stigma would be, I just want to add to all the different aspects and calls to action that we have. So I know with that, we have about 5 minutes left, right, Christy? So if there are, any questions that anyone has, if you want to, I'm comfortable with, unless there's a bunch, but if somebody just wants to turn their mic on and ask a question for any of our panelists, please feel free to do so.
Not for me.
Yeah, not for David.
I know we had one question in the chat. I don't know for sure if either any of you guys might be able to answer this, but Peggy, I believe, asked, what are you finding with evictions of military personnel in the region as spouses have been losing jobs?
Could you say that again?
Yep. So it says, what are you finding with evictions of military personnel in the region as spouses have been losing jobs?
And are you speaking, is that military personnel, like still active military personnel, or military veterans?
I believe they're referring to active military personnel.
Peggy, are you still on?
Okay.
I would say that the majority of the evictions have not yet come to pass. That moratorium is getting ready to be lifted. Unfortunately, we're going to see a wave of that here in the very near future. So I don't know that we can answer that question yet. I think 90 days from now, we're going to have a very different.
Yeah, and just to add with David, the only processes that have begun were the pre-COVID-19 eviction processes that began before. So we're not going to see it yet. And a number of counties have instituted programs to help, so we won't know how that will play out in the bigger picture yet. Still a lot of information that needs to come still.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Linda Brogowski from the Frederick County Veterans Advisory Council. I put in the chat that the county will be entering into an MOU with Maryland Legal Aid to do eviction prevention, specifically for people who were affected by COVID-19. It's not specific to veterans, but it doesn't exclude veterans. So assuming that the individual meets the income eligibility requirements, they could get eviction prevention services from Maryland Legal Aid if for some reason they don't meet the eligibility requirements. Then Maryland Legal Aid will make a warm transfer for pro bono legal support. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and people are more than welcome to contact me directly, and I can connect them once the MOU is signed, which should be in the next week or so.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Linda. That's a great resource to have. Any other questions real quick while we have another about minute or so?
I see one comment in here from Julie. She mentions USAA has also launched the Military Family Relief Initiative, which includes $30 million of support to military families affected by COVID-19. So if there is an active duty family facing eviction, please have them reach out to Julie at jriggs@bluestarfam.org. So she put her contact information in the chat.
Great. Awesome. That's also another great resource. Thank you, Julie.
There's one other need that has emerged, and maybe this is not the best way. Maybe Serving Together has heard this. You know, we started the program with a minute of silence for David Perez. Military families are expressing concern about funeral expenses and just funeral support generally. So I want to throw that out there as something that we need to come together on. Thank you.
Absolutely, good point. And I believe, you know, in terms of, you know, this network, the beauty of the Serving Together network is for us to rally together. So continue to be a part of our collaboratives, continue to be a part of referring people in and having these exchange of referrals for us to, you know, successfully help these clients that as they're coming through the pipeline and we're seeing these needs rise over the next several months.
Here we go, back in.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating, and a special thank you to David, Patrick, and John for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Very much appreciated. Great work, everybody.
Thank you very much.